The Electoral College is in the process of casting its votes. That includes delegates from battleground states, Wisconsin and Michigan. Both states are expected to officially assign their votes to President-elect Joe Biden. In Michigan, officials closed legislative office buildings today after lawmakers announced they received credible threats related to the vote. Meanwhile, the state of Wisconsin cast its 10 electoral votes for Joe Biden just after 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This despite more last-minute efforts by the Trump campaign to stop the certification of the vote. Joining us now to talk about all of this is CBS News 2020 campaign reporter Adam Brewster. Hi, Adam. Great to see you. So, of course, the election was back in November. The presidential transition is already underway. So can you remind us why today matters?
So think back, way back to November 3rd, or even the months leading up to November 3rd, when we would talk about the election and we would look at the states that President-elect Biden or President Trump would have had to win the election. And, you know, there's all sorts of numbers assigned to states, 16 to Michigan, 10 to Wisconsin. Those are the Electoral College votes. Well, those aren't just numbers. Those are people. And today those people are going to cast their official votes for President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris inside of state capitals today. You mentioned Wisconsin just wrapped up. Governor Evers, who was one of President-elect Biden's electors in Wisconsin, said we made it after he announced the 10-0 vote for President-elect Biden in Wisconsin. So it's the electors themselves, those people who you're actually voting for when you cast your vote for president, who are going out today and affirming that popular vote. The state parties earlier this year voted on slates of electors, so the Republicans would have had a slate had President Trump won these states. And today the Democratic slates of electors are going there to cast their votes and sort of make that formal.
And the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled on a recount challenge today. Can you tell us the outcome of that?
Sure. It was just about an hour before the Wisconsin Electoral College members met to cast those votes for President-elect Biden. And in a 4-3 decision, the court said rejected President Trump's challenge to the state's recount. The president's campaign was trying to throw out more than 220,000 votes cast in Milwaukee and Dane counties, basically in 4 separate categories of votes, said that those types of votes went against Wisconsin's election laws. And because of that, those votes needed to be thrown out. The justices, the majority of justices, disagreed, saying, you know, there was no merit to one of the challenges, and the others, they were made too late. The majority opinion made an analogy to a sporting event, saying the rules of the game were set and the game has been decided, and the president waited until the season was over even to challenge the results of the election. The Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court did, in her dissenting opinion, take issue with a couple of the areas of ballots that the Trump campaign highlighted, and said the court does need to address those issues so that they don't happen again going forward, and kind of said the majority punted on going after that. It's also worth taking a quick half step back to April, when there was a state Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. Everyone remembers the long lines probably from that election, and it was one of the first elections held during the pandemic. Well, Wisconsin voted on a state Supreme Court justice that day, and Justice Jill Karofsky, a liberal, defeated former conservative Justice Dan Kelly, who was endorsed by President Trump. Today, one conservative justice sided with the 3 liberals. He authored that majority opinion, Justice Brian Hagedorn, the conservative, but it was that coalition, the 3 liberals and him, and the balance of the court narrowed, the conservative majority narrowed in that April election. It's just something worth remembering.
Absolutely. And moving over to Michigan now, Adam, Michigan closed its legislative offices today after receiving credible threats of violence. Do you have any updates with that situation?
So reporters who are at the state capitol in Lansing today have shown a relatively quiet scene. Some protesters there, making their presence known, but not really a large scene by any stretch compared to what we've seen at previous protests in Lansing this year, especially those related to the pandemic, or even some of those during election hearings that the legislature held. Michigan State Police said this morning that they were not aware of any credible threats of violence, but a state representative, a Republican state representative, drew some attention this morning when, during a radio interview, he was talking about a Hail Mary, a last-minute attempt, and the radio host asked, can you ensure everyone is going to be safe today in Lansing? And he said no. Well, that was quickly condemned by Republican leadership in the House. He was stripped of his committees. The state party said they didn't know what he was talking about, but that sort of raised a lot of questions about what was going to happen today in Lansing. But so far, a quiet scene. We do know that electors were offered security escorts from their car inside the state Capitol building, and the Capitol is only open to those who are involved in the Electoral College vote today.
All right, and Adam, earlier today, the top Republicans in Michigan's legislature released statements about the Electoral College vote. What did they say in those statements?
So these came from Michigan Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey and House Speaker Lee Chatfield. You may remember those names because last month they were among the Michigan Republican state lawmakers who went to the White House to meet with President Trump when they said, Michigan casts its electoral votes based on who wins the popular vote. And they put out statements, saying that there needs to continue to be investigations into this election. But they came forward today and said, these Electoral College votes, they have to go for Joe Biden. And it's worth reading, a couple excerpts from their statements. Speaker Chatfield said, quote, "I can't fathom risking our norms, traditions, and institutions to pass a resolution retroactively changing the electors for Trump simply because I think there may have been enough widespread fraud to give him a win. That's unprecedented for good reason." He added, quote, "I fear we'd lose our country forever," saying, he may have some questions, but this was not a norm and not a line that he was willing to cross. Senate Majority Leader Shirkey expressed, said he was disappointed in the outcome of the presidential election, but said, quote, "We cannot let that disappointment overshadow the wins of conservative candidates across our state and nation, nor can we allow that disappointment to erode the very foundation of our country." So both of them there shutting the door on this idea that Republican legislators may step in and appoint a different slate of electors. They have faced pressure from the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, during a hearing recently, saying that that was part of the duty and one of the things that he was asking them to do, to follow that Constitution, which has some provisions about the role of the legislature in selecting these electors. Shirkey also said, Senator Shirkey said that Michigan's Democratic electors need to be able to do their duty free of threats of violence and intimidation. So pretty strong statements today from these Republicans who said while they were disappointed in the election results, they just were not willing to break those norms.
All right. Well, Adam Brewster, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tanya.